Hi there, welcome to the Upcycle Design Lab. If this is your first time here, I'm Cindy and I craft using recycled and repurposed materials to give you ideas on ways to make and create more economically and ecologically. And today I'm going to show you how you can make some cute abstract framed art from a beer or soda can. I picked up these frames at Dollar Tree, so they're very inexpensive, and 5x7 seems to be a pretty good size to use. So you also obviously need your aluminum cans, and I've already gone ahead and started tearing these down. I have a very specific way that I break down my cans, and I have a lot of video tutorials on information on how to take the tops off of the cans, how I tear down the cans, and also how I flatten the cans into sheets to work with. So I'm going to go through that process pretty quickly. I'm just going to cut these down and flatten them with my iron. And if you need more information on any of these techniques, be sure to check the description box for additional tutorials. Here are my 3 flattened aluminum can sheets, and I'm going to set them aside for a minute and go back to my picture frames because I need to cut some mats for the background of each of them. And I just have some plain white cardstock here for that. And I'm going to use this paper insert for a template. If you want to, you can mark and measure 5x7, but I just kind of like to do it the fast way. So I'm just going to hold the template in place and cut my pieces. You can use any SVG file that you can find on Etsy, or you can make your own if you have software that will do that. And you can use any silhouette shape that you'd like. You will need to resize it so that it will fit on the aluminum sheet, and I would recommend not going any wider than 3 1/4 inches wide and 7.5 inches long. As far as cutting aluminum sheets on the Cricut cutting machine, I've also done a full tutorial which I will link to in the description. But the key things that you need to know about cutting aluminum with a Cricut maker are that you are going to be using a regular fine point blade. I use the copper metal setting for my material, and you do want to be sure to tape down all the edges of your aluminum can with some packing tape or masking tape to make sure that your edges are secured and that the metal will not move around at all on the mat. I'm going to cut the shape a couple of different times because I want to make this drop shadow effect behind the cat. And to do that, I have my kind of junky mat that I use for cutting aluminum, and I've got my piece taped on here. And then I have a newer mat that I'm going to use to cut out the drop shadow effect. Now, if you had black cardstock, you could just use that. I don't happen to have any black cardstock, so I'm just using an old Christmas card, and I'm going to cut that out, and then I'll use some black paint to make my drop shadow. I'm not an expert on which mat you should use with which papers and things, but this is the only new mat I have, so I'm going to use that with my paper. I am using a Cricut maker, as I mentioned before, and people sometimes ask me if other Cricut cutting machines will work for this process. To be honest, I am not familiar with any of the other machines, but if your machine does have a material listed as metal or copper, I would think that you could give this method a try because, as I mentioned, it does just use a fine point blade. And for my cardstock, I chose heavy cardstock. Again, I'm not an expert at cutting a lot of different materials on my machine. So if you're not sure which cardstock thickness to select, you can test out a few different material settings on your machine. Let's see if I can remember how to weed paper. I think you're supposed to leave the design on the mat and then remove the rest of the paper. So that's what I'll do here. Weeding the aluminum is a little bit different. Save that for my next silhouette, and then I can just remove this from my mat. I honestly have not cut much of anything on my Cricut cutting machine except for aluminum sheets. So you may be much more skilled at this than I am if you have a cutting machine. But there's my first cat silhouette shape. I like to save my tape pieces because I can reuse them a few times, so I'll just leave them on the mat. And like I said, this mat is pretty beat up. but it works well for the aluminum because you're taping the piece down anyway. So this is going to come off all together. And to weed it, I want to just kind of find my line. And I'm just going to gently bend the metal back and forth until it breaks. And once I've gotten it separated in one spot, I can just kind of follow the line around and gently pull the piece apart. Some of the corners get a little tricky, and if you have a more detailed shape, it takes a little bit more patience. But it's pretty easy to separate the shape out once you have it cut. And the Cricut machine allows you to cut much more intricate shapes from the aluminum than you could cut by hand. So here's my second cat silhouette shape. And the way I'm gonna design my layout is I'm gonna have these two kind of facing each other. And I think that I want the drop shadow to be opposite. So I'm going to just paint around the edge of this piece with a little bit of black paint. You can paint the whole shape if you want to, but you really only need to cover the edge that will show under your design. And of course you can skip this whole step if you don't want to add the drop shadow effect. To finish the cat art, I'm using a glue stick to attach the two cat shapes together. The glue does set up pretty quickly, but it does allow a little bit of time to adjust the alignment of the two pieces. And you can use the glue stick to attach the cat to your mat as well, but I decided to use double-sided tape for this step because it's just a little bit cleaner and you don't have to worry about getting any glue on the outside of your artwork. So I just need to repeat that process a couple more times and then I'll have my 4 pieces of framed art. At this point, your artwork is finished, but I decided I wanted to kind of have mine in a slightly different configuration. So I'm going to use a little bit of duct tape to tape the pieces together so that they make one larger piece of art. I could add some wire here to hang it, but I've decided to make a silly little hanger hook out of a piece of hanger that I had left. And I've spray painted it with some silver spray paint. So I'm just going to go ahead and tape this onto the back of my frame as well. And the frame's really lightweight, so I think that duct tape will hold it just fine. If I need to, I can add some glue later. If you enjoyed today's content, please give this video a thumbs up, and you can click the subscribe button to join my YouTube community. If you're interested in more techniques and tips for working with aluminum beer and soda cans, or if you'd like to learn how I make cute insect plant charms from aluminum cans, you can click one of the playlists now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you back here soon in the lab for my next experiment.